little something with my video today. Instead of filming in front of my window here, I'm filming in front of my desk. I thought maybe a little bit more interesting background might be more interesting today. So if you watched my other videos and you have an opinion, go ahead and let me know what you think. Anyways, today I'm going to have a little bit of a rant for you, and I'm gonna try to stay on topic. I try to keep these rants as constructive and informative as possible, so I'm gonna try to do that as well. Something that I've been noticing a lot in the communities is a lot of people are talking about the absolutely required tools in order to get started doing energy work and witchcraft, and how incredibly expensive it is, and how all this stuff is absolutely necessary, and how much they need to invest, and how much they need to spend, and what they need to own in order to even get started, which is kind of terrible when you're first starting out and you're not entirely committed or entirely sure that witchcraft is right for you or paganism is right for you and all that stuff. So I wanted to talk today about why witchcraft is so freaking expensive, and I'm going to try to keep the swears to a minimum, but no guarantees, because I mean, y'all have met me. So first, I kind of want to talk a little bit about our history, because history is important. It's how we understand where we are now and how we got here, and we can decide how relevant what we're doing now is to where we want to be in the future. So that's why history is important. So So we talk about witchcraft and all the different traditions of witchcraft in terms of how ancient they are and how they've been passed down generations and generations and generations. So when you take a look at the history of things, we're talking about, you know, like the 1800s, the 1700s, when you get down to the year 1700, and then 1600, and then like 1400s, and the Middle Ages, and going back even further to like pre-Christian Europe. We're getting back into like the early 100s and stuff. When we look at the technology and the tools that were available, when we're looking at the roots of pre-Christian traditions and the earliest days of witchcraft, when we look and see what the tradition looks like, not from a witchcraft perspective, but from an anthropological perspective, what we see the wise women and the cunning folk and those people using are just the things they find in their environment. Okay, so they're picking the herbs that are in their garden. You might see a lot of times on the internet when people are talking about like broke witch tips, they talk about going to the kitchen section of your grocery store or ethnic grocery stores in order to find herbs. And the reason why that is a huge witch tip is because most of the herbs that we use in witchcraft are cooking herbs, because that's what people were using to cook with. And that's what they would have growing in their gardens, and that's what grew in the environment around them. And that's how that genesis kind of happened. It's how the evolution occurred there. So that's not a coincidence that that happened, that's how it evolved. So those things that we use in witchcraft are the things that we tend to have growing in our environments already. They are what we had on hand. And the same is true for all the rest of our tools and supplies. You don't have to go out and buy a special yew wood or aspen wood or oak wood wand. You can go out in your environment and find a branch from a tree that has fallen. Even if, like me until recently, you live in a crazy desert or something where there aren't any trees handy, which is really terrible and sad. There are still plants out there that you can provide wood or wood-like substances. So even when I was in Arizona, where I was for the last 17 years, there are cactuses or cactus-like plants like ocotillo that have spines. They're cactuses with spines in them, and those spines can be used for wands or wood or for creating wreaths or things like that. The natives in Arizona use them for creating baskets and for creating fences and other woven type things. And so you can use those things in your native environment too. And that was pretty easy. You just went wandering off into the desert and they were freaking everywhere. And so when you're trying to find things that are particular in whatever witchy thing that you're reading or looking at, you really need to ask yourself, what is the purpose of this thing and why do I need it? So you don't need to think like, I need an oak wand that is exactly 8 inches long and it needs to have a pink quartz tip on the end. Like, why do I need 8 inches? Why do I need oak? Why do I need a wand? Normally a wand is to connect with the element of air, or in some traditions fire. And so you can think like, well, I don't have a wand, but I have incense. And so I'll use an incense stick as a wand and call it good. Or you can improvise your own wand. You could just go to like Michael's or Home Depot if you're really desperate and get a dowel, and they're like $1. Or you can go out into an empty lot and pick up a dried reed or whatever is growing there instead. Like, really think about what is available to you in your environment and what you can use that you already have. I mean, if you really need to, you can grab a pencil out of your desk drawer and call it a day. Pencils are perfectly carvable. Put some runes or sigils in that thing and just go for it. In the older books, and this is where the history is going to come into it, witchcraft really started experiencing a revival. It was never gone, okay? But it went very, very underground and was not very popular. Very underground, not very many people practiced it for a really, really long time, and it experienced one heck of a revival when Gardner came around and created Wicca. Now, yes, Wicca is a created reconstructionist religion, and what that means is that it takes a bunch of traditions from history or practices that were already around and puts them together in a framework that Gardner created himself. And that's okay. It doesn't mean it's less valid as a religion, it just means it's not ancient, and that's alright. New religions come around all the time, and they're perfectly valid. People can have new revelations and new discoveries and stuff like that. It's totally cool. Does not mean Wicca isn't valid, it just means it's not ancient, and that's fine. But he really kicked off the revitalization of witchcraft in mainstream media, and I still wouldn't say that witchcraft is mainstream yet, but we are getting witchy makeup palettes and drinks at Starbucks, so we're kind of getting there. But people are also being severely discriminated against and run out of towns in some areas of America still if they have a witchy bent. And so, you know, not totally accepted, but not totally rare either. It's an awkward stage. I think that's probably the best word I have for it. So, yeah, the evolution of that from Gardner creating Wicca in the 60s till now has been pretty incredible to watch. I, of course, wasn't around in the 60s, but my mother was, so I kind of got to hear her account of how that generated and stuff, and I can tell you that in her time, things were very different. We didn't all have to have crystal balls and crystal wands that were just so, I mean, you know, I have neat things like this quartz crystal wand, which is very, very cool, and they tend to be very, very expensive, like 40 or 50 bucks. But my mother didn't have anything like this. She had cute, tiny little quartzes instead, and that's perfectly fine. They work just as well. I am just as fond of this guy as I am of, obviously didn't prepare, this guy here. And I'm kind of putting him against my hair so you can see him. This is the problem with having the camera so very far away. So this guy here was like $2 at a science store aimed for kids. And it's just a quartz crystal. And I find these guys equally useful. I'm a little bit fonder of this guy because he's been around with me a lot longer, and he's a totally raw quartz, where this guy is a carved quartz that has been shaped into this wand. He didn't form this way naturally. He probably formed in a very similar shape, and then someone carved him to be in a more perfect shape that they found much more pleasing and could charge more for. And this guy is totally natural instead. So, you know, I'm equally fond of both of them. This guy's huge and honking, and this guy's totally natural. So, you know, they each have their materials, but my mom's materials were much more like this, and she got most of her crystals at science places and lapidaries and stuff like that. And that's totally fine. I mean, a crystal is a crystal. So, You don't need to be spending 50 bucks for every crystal that you use. You don't even need crystals. You can just as easily use something like this. I don't know how well you can see that, so I'll get much closer here. So you could use something like this instead. This is white quartz with some iron in it. So it's not a pure quartz, but it is white quartz mixed with other things that were in the environment. This is just a rock I found while I was hiking, and I found it pleasing to me, and I had a good energy, and I wasn't in a protected area, so I brought him home with me because he seemed pretty friendly. And that is something that I've always done since I was little, and I'm kind of weird that way, so you know, that's just kind of how I roll. But you could just as easily use something like this, like a rock that you just found while you were walking around in the environment and seemed appealing. So you don't need to have expensive fancy tools. It's fun to have them and it's great for collecting, but they're not necessary. And witchcraft doesn't have to be expensive. It's fine to use cooking herbs. Cooking herbs are just as powerful as witchy herbs you find in a shop. You can make and roll your own incense. You can buy your candles at a dollar store, or you can buy them at your fancy witchy shop. Candle is a candle. It's the intent and energy and what you do with those tools that really matters. Remember, again, in ancient times, people were just using household items and whatever they had in their kitchen to create their witchcraft. The cauldron is a very powerful and traditional symbol of the witch, but in context, when that symbol came into use, you know, the witch around the cauldron is just a stew pot. You would make your soup or your stew in it, and you would hang it over your fireplace because that's how you cooked stuff. So everybody had a cauldron and everybody used it to cook their dinner. I mean, it wasn't abnormal. It wasn't exclusive to witches. So it's just a cooking implement. So you could use a stew pot instead of a cauldron if you want. You don't have to have a cauldron. And cauldrons now are extremely ridiculously expensive because they're only sold to witchy folk and people can charge a ridiculous amount for them. And there's no reason to do that silliness. Unless you want to. If you like the aesthetic, go for it, because the happier you are and the more special you feel doing your craft, the better that is, but you don't have to be that special. Witchcraft does not have to be expensive. Remember, it's a tradition passed down to us from ancient peoples, and they did not have specialty shops, and they did not have the amazingly skilled craftspeople that we have today, and their magic was just as potent. So don't make it harder on yourself or more expensive than it needs to be. And remember that you can go to perfectly normal places to get your supplies. Your mortar and pestle was just a regular cooking implement that was used to grind up herbs and seasonings and spices to put in your meals. So instead of going to a witchy shop and paying $180 for your mortar and pestle, go to your favorite cooking store and spend 20 bucks. And you'll get one that's probably sealed and won't soak up all the oils and juices from your herbs, and will be so much easier to clean. Be practical about things and don't buy into the hype and stuff unless you really feel like you want to spend that money in that way and treat yourself. But don't feel obligated to invest like that. Now, and I should probably go over this in more detail in another video, which I will do, but just very briefly, when it comes to building your spells, when you read things in communities, and I'm talking about when you read things in like Facebook groups or on Tumblr or Pinterest or whatever, you'll see these spells and they'll have like, you need to use these 4 herbs and these 6 crystals and these 3 oils, and you need to have this particular candle, and you need to have this flower, and you need to have these sigils, and then you need to have a wand and an athame and a chalice and some incense, and you also need to have this kind of surface that's been blessed with this special water, and then you need to have the moon in this quadrant on this day of the week, with the stars in this arrangement, and you need to have this sacred bath first, and you need to do, okay, that's really fabulous, and we're going to call that maximum effort, okay, plus ultra. So my dead Pull fans and my Hero Academia fans there. Anyway, so like that's really an awesome spell, but like figure each one of those ingredients that you put into your spell adds a certain amount of energy to the task at hand. And that's fine, but your task only takes a certain amount of energy to accomplish. So like let's say it takes 4 energy units to accomplish, and that whole list of ingredients comes up with 180 energy units. That means like 176 of those were not necessary. So really think about how much energy you need to put into a spell to make it successful, and really how much effort you're going to need in order to bring about the results that you want. And you know, a little overkill is fine. Like you can go as excessive as you want, and that's totally cool, but you don't have to. Being excessive and overkill is not necessary. I mean, it's fun and it feels really good, and then you can be really, really confident about the results. But you know, if you can only put 8 energy units into your spell and you only need 4, then you can call it good. So just keep that in mind. Not every spell needs to have herbs and spices and flowers and sigils and runes and goddesses and gods and all the elements and candles and all the things. They don't all need all the things. They can be super simple and easy, and really keep that in mind to minimize the work that you have to do. Witchcraft isn't intended to be really, really hard. It's supposed to be an everyday practice. Remember, ancient peoples were doing this in their day-to-day lives, and if you're having to go through like months of effort to come up with a spell that is just for like making your day-to-day life a little easier, then that's probably way more effort than is really necessary. Now, if you're doing a giant ritual to bring winter in the middle of summer, then we're going to expect a lot of effort, because you're kind of pushing things way out of their normal realm of ease. You know, you're really messing with the flow of the universe there. So we kind of expect that to take a lot of effort. But if you're just kind of nudging things into place, it's not going to take that much effort. And that's usually what we're doing. We're usually just giving things a little bit of push to get them right where they need to be. And that's all we're doing. So it's not going to take that much effort. So a little bit ranty, hopefully a lot of good information in here that you can think about. Really thinking about where you want to put your dollars and your effort, and what kind of tools you can get that are reusable and that are really going to make your life easier and kind of fit your lifestyle. Like I said, there are things like a good stew pot that are great because you can use it not only as a cauldron to make tinctures and essential oils and candles and stuff, but you can also wash it and then make soup. So that's a fantastic tool to get. Same thing with a mortar and pestle. You can grind up those herbs in your garden or grind up your spices and use them in spells and make incense, and then also cook some pasta. So I don't like things that only have one purpose alone. Something that I'm really kind of excited about is one of my favorite witchy suppliers is Azure Green, and they just started carrying metal pentacle. I'm gonna pronounce this wrong. It's a trivet or a trivet. But the purpose of those things is you put them on your counter and then you rest your pot on them to take it off the stove, but not burn your counter in the process, which is really fantastic. But I thought that's a great thing to get as an altar tile or to put it on your wall for when you're doing your spells or your prayers or your devotionals. And then when you're done with that, you can then use it in the kitchen to not burn your counters, and then also kind of bless your food in the process. You can be like, I take the soup off my counter and off my stove and put it on my counter and let it rest in charge on this pentacle as it cools, and I finish it off. So think about things like that, where you can take something that has a practical everyday use and then work it in to not only your everyday life, but then let it double as a witchy component as well. Because we live in a crazy capitalist society that is way obsessed with stuff, like so much stuff, and we gotta think about how we're using our dollars, our space, our supplies, and our natural resources. So that is something us witches do need to do. And as witchcraft becomes more mainstream and more popular, that is something we really, really do need to be mindful of. Okay? So I think that's probably enough ranting. I'm at 20 minutes now. So I will catch you guys later. Tell me what you think about these tips and what I have to say on the topic. I will go over constructing a spell in another video, because that is something that's been on my list for a really long time. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please just drop them in the comments. And remember to hit the like and the subscribe. You guys know how YouTube works. And I will talk to you later in another video. Bye!